Aha, here we are. Drew Patterson, it's been a while. It's nice to see you. Thank you very much for joining us on PhocusWire Pulse. You and I have the responsibility of getting into some kind of like big picture issues around alternative accommodation and short-term rentals. So your kind of day job at the moment is the CEO and the co-founder at Thermal, which is a surfing trip startup that was founded just last year. But you're talking to us in your capacity as the executive chairman of Transparent, which is the short-term rental data and strategy provider, of which we've done a lot of stuff with. It provides some terrific insight into what's been going on. But again, Drew, thanks ever so much for joining us. I wondered if we could get your sense, first of all, of some issues, if there are any. Obviously, sometimes there aren't issues, but first of all, around supply and the kind of the ongoing attempt by every platform to just get more inventory. I mean, how does that kind of shake out, do you sense, in the future, Drew?
Well, I think that's by every such imagination, that's a challenge that we seem to be facing as an industry. You know, we have a product that consumers love. You know, you compare alternative accommodations to the hotel industry, and you find inventory that is cheaper, that has far more diversity around locations, that provides travelers with amenities that they can't find in hotels, things like living rooms and kitchens and washers and dryers and the like, and all that is driving lots and lots of consumer interest and desire for this category. The challenge, of course, is how do we get more of it? And as you point out, you know, is there going to be tension, or what is the competitive dynamic between various platforms in trying to secure that inventory? You know, we've been, you know, I think we've seen a steady trend of cross-listing, right, where inventory is appearing in channels, and that's certainly the most true at the most professionalized segment of the industry. You know, if you start to look at, you know, the Saunders, the Vicasas, you know, the V-Trips of the world, you know, that have robust marketing and distribution and technology arms, they're absolutely, you know, aggressively pursuing lots and lots of distribution channel. And at the same time, I think one of the things that we at Transparent have been intrigued by is the durability of channel loyalty amongst smaller property managers. You know, for example, if you look at Airbnb, you know, the vast majority of their supply, you know, really are individuals. You know, there's somebody who has, you know, a handful of listings, you know, fewer than 10 listings under management, and those property managers have, you know, by and large, remain very loyal to Airbnb as a partner. You know, that they're not engaging in this kind of multi-channel listing nearly to the same degree as larger property managers.
Now, it's an interesting point. You talked at the very beginning of your answer there, Drew, about you know, cross listings on multiple platforms. Does that dilute the effectiveness of what a host or an owner is trying to do, or is it a smart strategy by both the platforms and also the owners themselves to just be on every single platform that's available?
Well, I think it's you know, I'm confident your other guests here, you know, are in the business doing this stuff day to day. You know, far be it from me to tell them how to run their business. Right. You know, I guess as an observer, a Transparent, you know, we're, you know, style ourselves as an intelligence provider for the industry, and so we work across a variety of these kinds of property managers. You know, to us, it stands to reason. You know, if you are, again, you know, one of these larger property managers that has a, you know, a robust technology organization and can manage the complexity of different distribution channels, and you can see why they might do that. On the other hand, if you're, you know, an individual host who has 2 or 3 listings, you know, and you're using the tools and technology, the software, if you will, of an Airbnb or a Vrbo to run your listing, well, gosh, you really need the complexity of, and do you want the complexity of trying to keep calendars in line across different channels, and, you know, the complexity of using multiple communication tools. You know, if you're not so big that you need a separate piece of technology like property management system, but rather can rely on the software of the platforms, well, yeah, maybe that becomes more than you need to take on. So I guess I'm not giving you a very definitive answer, but
no, that's great. I mean, where do you sense all this is kind of shaking out from a marketing perspective? So you've got the war chests of the Expedias, Vrbo, and what Booking.com are doing. Airbnb always claims that it never does any performance marketing. It's all word of mouth and SEO and all those kind of things. I mean, Is that something that's going to be around forever in terms of, and forever is a silly word to use because we can only really look ahead a few months or into next year. But do you sense that those kind of marketing tactics by those big players are going to stay in place? So performance marketing for the big OTAs, reliance on SEO and word of mouth and brand for Airbnb, or is there likely to be some shift just because the markets are always shifting?
Well, I think I think the durability of those strategies says something. The persistence of those strategies says something. We've been hearing Booking and Expedia for some time talk about their desire to reduce their dependence on performance marketing and to increase their kind of brand awareness and brand presence. And to be sure, Booking and Expedia both enjoy meaningful direct traffic. But when you compare that to Airbnb, I think you can see the difference in the Airbnb brand. By the same token, Airbnb has at times, dabbled in or even made efforts. I mean, I think they spent what, 800 million in 2019 on performance marketing, and I think quite publicly have, and you can see in their financials have pulled back from that, and it doesn't seem to have held them back. They've been able to continue growing, through pandemic and in the face of fairly limited performance marketing spend. So I think both these businesses have found things that they're good at, and they have a business model that works for them. We see no reason to expect that the future will differ from the past here.
And if we can move on to the session that was just two before us, which was with Rentals United, and they're talking specifically about software and all the tech that goes on behind the scenes, which is often as complex and difficult to understand as what people see on the front end. I mean, what do you see as some kind of broader trends on the technology and the software side, if any?
Well, I think, lots of players, Rentals United being one example of that, are stepping into the need, into the void and filling the need around this kind of sophistication of technology. Mm-hmm. And I guess, to circle back to my previous answer, I mean, you can see from our work, we find that the fastest growing part of the industry in terms of growth rate, not percentages, but growth rate, are these larger, more sophisticated property managers. And it stands to reason. I mean, these folks are out raising large sums of capital. They have an imperative for growth. In some cases, they're soon to be publicly traded companies. Stands to reason that they might be growing faster than the more long tail, individualized parts of the market. And these larger, more sophisticated operators, are far more savvy around price competitiveness and how they think about pricing given channels. They have well-developed websites of their own. They're trying to get customers to come book directly with them. I think in that world, for that segment of the market, technology is an important differentiator. It's an important part of their basic proposition to asset owners, and saying this is why a Sonder or a Vacasa, et cetera, can generate more yield out of that asset than can a subscale property manager.
Okay. And we come on to some of those kind of other players in a moment. I mean, what do you think are some of the big picture trends? So the previous, my chat just now with Steve was talking about, this move towards 30-day stays. That's clearly where the target that they're looking for. I mean, as a bloke in his late 40s with a family, just the concept of going away and staying in a long-term rental just seems very enticing, but very alien. But I mean, it's an interesting move. And as the skeptic in all this, I wonder whether it is just a marketing ploy or it's a very short-term trend, or do you see a similar kind of shift at scale, or is this very much a niche opportunity, this kind of 30-day plus move?
Well, I too share your life experience and moment of like, wow, there's a lot of inertia. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. I too have 2 kids in school and the like. That said, we see in our data some evidence for this. We see, I think Brian Chesky was quoted at the Skiff conference last week saying it's now 20%, 30-day plus is now 20% of their nights. Yep. That's supported by the data that we see as well. So that definitely checks out with transparent view of the world. I think a fifth of the population, or of this industry, rather, now falling into that category is significant. It certainly is a question of what will happen post pandemic. Is this a moment in time, or will we see more durability around this? at the same time, I think you're seeing more businesses that are being built, distributed from ground up. Where companies are saying we know how to work with folks who could be based anywhere in the world, and that kind of flexibility is a real advantage, a benefit that they can begin to provide their employees. So, are we perhaps in an temporarily inflated moment? Sure. Is there a long-term trend towards a greater degree of mobility? Yeah, I think so.
Okay, interesting. I mean, you can't move this year for people talking about subscriptions, whether it's TripAdvisor Plus, what eDreams have been doing with its Pulse, with its Prime service. We do see kind of loyalty programs. I mean, what is your kind of sense on the subscription model, and whether it does apply also to something like short-term rentals and alternative accommodation?
I think subscriptions are probably a ways off for the alternative accommodations category. Look, for example, at the challenges that TripAdvisor has experienced in the rollout of Plus, and the tension they saw with owners. And I think, to begin to put together subscriptions, right, you now need to start to have a greater degree of confidence around inventory, and the ability to access that inventory at scale. You compare that to TripAdvisor's Plus program. How did they pull that off? Well, they pull that off, largely because you had a bunch of wholesalers and bed banks that provided them with lots of access to net rate inventory, so they could fairly quickly get to scale around a product like that. I just don't see anything in the alternative accommodations world that would provide that degree of aggregation of inventory. If anything, I mean, maybe the platforms could be there, but even in the case of an Airbnb, look at the challenges they face as they look to do promotional merchandising. All that promotional inventory, all those price decisions sit in the hands of hundreds of thousands or millions of individual owners. And so you don't have that much promotional inventory here yet. You don't have vehicles that allow for lots of highly distressed inventory, or greater sophistication around that. I think that makes subscriptions tough. I do think the notion of a loyalty program stands to reason. To me, the logic that you saw of the hotel loyalty programs makes, it's the same example here, where you have customers who are moving between lots of different areas for different purposes. There's kind of movement from business to leisure use cases. Loyalty programs creating lock-in and giving travelers benefit for that. And, I think that's very much the case in alternative accommodations. I'm a little surprised we haven't seen that take root yet.
Yeah. And what's your perspective on the kind of there are some question marks that some have about the fundamental economics of this sector, and say some of the major players that are operating in it. Sometimes things just don't add up. I just wonder whether you agree with that, and whether you can expand on whether some of those issues might be.
Well, I think so I guess there are kind of, in my mind, there are two large categories we might want to delineate. There was the urban property manager market, that came to market on the back of this kind of lease arb model, where you saw, Guild and Lyric and Sonder to success, but several of the players, and Stay Alfred being another example that kind of had challenges in the pandemic. I think you saw that, at that moment, it was the worst of all worlds, right? You had, fixed rental liability. But you didn't have an asset that you could use as a backstop to borrow against. A bunch of people didn't make it. On the other hand, Sonder looks like they are, poised for great things and positioned for success. And I think that speaks to a real need. I think you may say that the business model that some of these folks deployed, this kind of rental arb model, didn't work through the cycle, but there is a desire from consumers for a more apartment-like form of accommodation in urban areas. And again, I think Sonder and others are now well positioned to take advantage of that. So I think that can work. I think one of the things, though, that at least I've been struck by is, as you look at the progression of how this urban rental model has evolved, it's gone from something that looked much more like Airbnb, for lack of a better word, a distributed set of apartments all across the city, to what, to my mind at least, is a hotel and everything but name. They're
Right.
taking these operators are taking over floors of a building. Why are they doing that? Well, they need to create more efficiency around their operations. Cleaners can get more turns per day, and you want to put amenities into a given outlet. You need to you want more of your travelers to be able to take advantage of that. You want more leverage over, or scale over, the real estate provider. Well, what you're describing looks an awful lot like a hotel. It just happens to be, branded in this way that feels more alternative accommodations like for consumers. So maybe the more things change, the more they stay the same.
It's an interesting point where you talk about this, it is a blurring of the lines, whether it's from a marketing perspective or a operational perspective between hotels and rentals. Does anyone care?
Does anyone care? I mean, I think consumers care. I think consumers care. If you look at Sonder's brand perceptions, it is to my mind, I mean, they're growing faster. They seem to have a very strong brand identity within their kind of target millennial and younger consumer base, and a perception that they are something different from a traditional hotel brand. So I think at that level, consumers do care, and I think it's a credit to Sonder and that team of the brand they built, proposition they built. I think. To their credit, it's a different product for real estate owners. It allows for multifamily assets to now become part of the short-term rental pool. So, maybe I'm being a little too dismissive. There are lots of real ways in which they're creating value for and shifting the nature of assets for both consumers and for real estate owners.
So we've had what Sonder are doing, and you say they need to take over entire floors of hotels and things like that. But what about some of the chains and what they're doing? I mean, do you sense that perhaps they are worried about the way this is kind of evolving, or do you sense they have the strategic wherewithal to come back and do their own thing, or are hotels just way too busy just being hotels?
I think it's a fascinating question, Kevin. And I think Marriott's approach to this, to me, is the most intriguing. I mean, clearly, they've been the most aggressive and at the forefront of alternative accommodations amongst traditional hotel brands. But the piece that I find really fascinating is if you look at how they're going to market in this category, their economics look like, and their approach, to my mind, looks very, very similar to what you would think of as an OTA-like approach. They've partnered with a series of property managers. They get paid a commission on the revenue that they generate. It's non-exclusive inventory. So those homes can appear on other distribution channels. If I showed you those contract terms and I said, did this come from Booking.com or Vrbo? You're like, I don't know. It seems kind of like how an OTA operates with property managers, and yet, we're seeing that come out of a hotel brand. And I think the sort of piece that has me scratching my head, or at least just curious, is you see a different operating model in the form of Sonder, right? I mean, you see vertical integration with some other hospitality brands that are playing in more or less the same segment, but the legacy hotel brands have decided to take a different tack here.
Yeah, and last of all, then, Drew, if we can, I mean, if we were lucky enough to be talking this time next year, I mean, how do you think things will have shaken out, as hopefully 2022 does signal some recovery at scale across all the sectors? What do you think is going to happen?
Look, I think it's going to be a great year for the industry. I think you'll see some shifts in geographic mix. I do expect that we'll see a return to more urban demand patterns, by this time next year than we've seen. I think that has been quite hard for a lot of urban operators. I think we'll see whether or not there's the same degree of persistence to many of the leisure markets in North America that have done quite well. As a person who owns real estate, one of them, I hope it stays. I'm less confident, that we'll see the same level of demand we've seen for leisure markets in North America. But I think it's going to be a good year.
Okay. Best of luck with Thermal, the surfing startup. But thank you very much for talking to us in your capacity as the executive chairman of Transparent. Drew, nice to see you again. Thanks ever so much for joining us on PhocusWire Pulse. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin. Take care.